Air quality is a consistent top concern of Utahns, particularly along the Wasatch Front. Our geography sets the table for a stew of challenges: emissions from truck traffic, industrial activity, and chemicals, area source emissions, smoke from wood burning and forest fires, rapid growth, winter inversions, and summer ozone. We've seen more progress on some of these challenges than others. A couple of them may be largely beyond our control entirely, which makes addressing the things that we can control all the more urgent. We hope today's conversation will provide us with concrete answers on how Utah can step up its air quality game. We're privileged to have with us today 4 civic leaders who will have much to say on the topic. After each of them provides brief remarks, we'll move to a Q&A and then open up the discussion to questions from the audience. We just ask that you please hold your questions until that time. First, we'll hear from Kim Frost, Executive Director of the Utah Clean Air Partnership. Prior to taking the helm at UCAIR earlier this year, Kim worked in the private sector and as an executive with EDC Utah. Kim?
Let me unmute myself there. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the Utah Foundation for putting this panel together today, and thank you for the invitation to participate. We know that air quality is one of the public's greatest concerns, and it's especially relevant after this summer. As Peter mentioned, air quality in Utah, particularly along the Wasatch Front, is meteorology and geography as much as it is behavior, which is definitely not to say that there's nothing that we can do about it. As Utahns, we still have to do our part to help improve our air quality. Poor air quality poses public health risks, and it has negative economic consequences. This past year and a half, we've learned some really meaningful lessons related to air quality. During the pandemic, we saw 40% fewer cars on the road, and employers and employees learned that teleworking to help improve the air was possible. We watched the state implement a significant air quality telework program as a result of Senate Bill 15, and that laid the groundwork for the private sector to follow. This past summer, we saw detrimental effects of increased wildfires on our airshed, but wildfires alone were not responsible for our poor air quality. Summer ozone was actually the main contributor to the majority of our mandatory action days, which is important to this discussion because ozone, unlike California wildfires, is not entirely outside of our control. Educating Utahns to be part of the solution is critical. Public education around winter inversion and PM 2.5 has made significant improvements in our winter air. People used to only complain about who they consider to be the big polluters, but now research tells us that they recognize they have a role to play in reducing emissions as well. Education has led to action. We have the same opportunity with summer ozone. We need to help Utahns sort through the smoke and ozone talk to understand how they can help. We've learned that the more Utahns understand not just the issues, but the science and impact their actions have, the more willing they are to engage. UCAIR's mission is to help that happen on 3 fronts. We educate the general public about the issues and what they can do to be part of the solution. We partner with organizations like Utah Foundation of all kinds to unite around the cause of better air in Utah. And we catalyze change through awarding grants to a wide variety of organizations who are ready to make a difference. We know that Utah continues to be one of the fastest growing states. Air quality is a key consideration for growth planning, and if we grow thoughtfully, how we grow can actually be part of the solution. The decisions that we make today will impact our quality of life in the future. So thanks again to the Utah Foundation for bringing us all together for this conversation. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion and questions from the group. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Peter.
Great, thank you, Kim. Now we'll hear from Kim Shelley, Executive Director of Utah's Department of Environmental Quality. An engineer by training, Kim previously served as Deputy Director of DEQ, as Assistant Director of the Division of Water Quality, as Manager in the Surface Water Discharge Program, and in the DEQ's Division of Environmental Response and Remediation's Underground Storage Tank Program. She became head of DEQ at the end of 2020. Kim Shelley, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Happy to be with you all today. As Peter mentioned, I'm the director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, which includes the Division of Air Quality, the state agency that is focused on attaining and maintaining air quality standards to protect public health through their programs of monitoring, permitting, planning, research, and compliance. We are in a critical time in Utah as we work to address our air quality challenges. While Utah's air quality has continually improved over the past 20 years, and even more significantly over the past 10 years, we are also experiencing rapid population growth, leading to increased vehicle emissions, a changing climate that creates the conditions for more wildfires and more hot and dry days that contribute to the formation of ozone pollution, and our topography that compounds and concentrates poor air quality. The strategies we have now that have contributed to our progress over the past 20 years will soon be overwhelmed without the identification of new technologies, policies, and investments that can address the current sources of emissions while accommodating future growth. That said, Utah has a good track record of finding innovative solutions and partnerships and identifying strategies that support growth while reducing both the total amount of emissions and per capita emissions within the state. Our most successful efforts to improve air quality and reduce emissions have come from a greater scientific understanding of Utah's unique air quality challenges. In order to remain proactive as our population grows, our efforts to monitor air quality and support research for these complex issues must grow as well. We are currently in the process of seeking support for several strategies that will allow for increased monitoring, including adding monitors in areas that have grown enough according to census data to necessitate baseline monitoring, and air monitoring through a completely mobile, fully equipped, self-contained laboratory that will allow continuous monitoring of air pollutants at smaller scales than is possible with existing air quality networks. As I mentioned earlier, Utah has seen significant reductions in statewide air emissions over the past 10 years, in large part due to reductions in industrial emissions. Now the largest source of emissions, particularly along the Wasatch Front, is on-road sources or vehicles. We need a much stronger focus on making it easier for individuals to drive less and drive less polluting vehicles by continuing support of telework and surge telework in both the public and private sector, improving access and affordability of public transit, incentivizing cleaner and electric vehicles, and improving the electric vehicle charging network, as well as increasing public outreach and awareness of air quality issues. I've touched on just a handful of strategies and areas of focus for DEQ as an organization that are, in addition to our continuous efforts to monitor, research, plan, permit, and ensure compliance with state and federal rules related to air quality. I'm grateful to partners including policymakers and organizations like UCAIR, the Utah Foundation, and O2 Utah that are also committed to this work and are willing to create forums like this for discussion. It also leads to accountability and innovation. Thank you, Peter, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kim. Just a reminder to our audience, if you could hold your questions and comments until the Q&A portion of the program, that would be great. Now let's look at things from the economic perspective. Jill Flygare is the Chief Operating Officer of the Utah Inland Port Authority. Prior to joining the Inland Port in 2019, she worked as Managing Director of Internal Operations in the Governor's Office of Economic Development, as a Finance Director in the state's Department of Heritage and Arts, and as a Policy and Budget Analyst in the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. Jill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to thank the Utah Foundation for the invitation and to the esteemed panelists in which the Port Authority has had the opportunity to find shared vision and collaborative partnership over the last couple of years. The Utah Inland Port Authority, Sean, if you can go to the next slide, was created through legislative intent in 2018. It is a statewide entity instituting a regional approach. One of the most common myths surrounding the Port Authority is that it is a single location or a place, when in fact we are focused on the logistics system and how to make the entire system more effective and efficient. The purpose of the Port Authority is to insert public good into the marketplace, bringing both public and private interests together. By driving innovation and sustainability throughout the network, we are better able to solve systemic problems on a broader basis across the state. This approach allows Utah to be proactive and forward-leaning, looking at how the supply chain industry and logistics is changing and will continue to change. Utah will revolutionize the system and be on the forefront of that change in a very intentional way. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Specifically, the Port Authority is working on some very exciting projects and partnerships that are garnering national attention and positioning Utah as a hub of excellence in research and development, as well as to deploy new technology investments in electrified and alternative fuel transportation. It's important to note that by 2050, over 30% of heavy duty trucks moving cargo nationwide will run on alternative fuels. One of the Port Authority's objectives is to encourage shifts to cleaner vehicles and to build out the necessary infrastructure that will allow these vehicles to operate throughout our region. I will also note that 30% of cleaner vehicles will not be spread equally across our nation. And so as we are looking at partnerships and building infrastructure, if we don't build that infrastructure along the important corridors here in Utah, and as they connect to the ports in California, then we will get the dirty vehicles here in Utah. So it's critical that we invest here in Utah, and that through our partnerships, and with the Port Authority leading out, that the infrastructure and the funding be made here in Utah. So as fleets transition, that those fleets come here to Utah. Highlighting just a couple of programs and partnerships that the Port Authority is involved in. Many of you have heard of the Aspire Center at Utah State University. This project will partner with existing companies that currently exist within the jurisdictional land area in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake County. They will test both static and dynamic inductive charging to be able to move into commercialization. You can see that picture at the bottom half here of this slide. And we're very excited about this partnership with the Aspire Center, as we are looking at both electrification and inductive charging. We are also partnering with a company known as Biotech Technologies and Lancer Energy to build, produce, and distribute renewable energy throughout the system. Building an advanced renewable energy station within the jurisdictional area will provide both CNG, LNG, EV, and eventually hydrogen with mobile distribution capabilities. Up in the top left corner, you will see the mobile distribution capabilities to be able to take renewable energy right to the site rather than needing the vehicles to come to a station. So we will have both capabilities, come to a station or mobily take the renewable energy. And then of course, partnerships with DEQ and DAQ with the monitoring of air quality within regions, both the jurisdictional area and across the state. It is an incredible partnership. Next slide, please. And finally, the Port Authority is committed to address both programs directed at clean air as well as community enhancement. Unauthorized truck parking is a national problem, and one in which the west side of Salt Lake City is not immune. Truck idling all night is a problem with a solution. The Port Authority has 2 truck parking lots planned, designed, and ready to build. The parking lots will hold approximately 300 trucks and trailers with auxiliary plug-ins and the opportunity for renewable pedestals. Each lot will reduce idling by over 1,000 hours a day and over 45 tons of emissions per year. Through the partnerships that the Port Authority has spoke about today, we are beginning the exciting opportunities and welcome additional partnerships to help make Utah the place to work, live, and play. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Jill. Finally, we'll hear now from David Garbett. David is Executive Director of O2 Utah, an environmental nonprofit whose mission is to clean our state's air and address other environmental issues through policy vision and electoral involvement. David trained as an environmental economist and practiced law for 10 years at the intersection of the Federal Clean Air Act and public lands law. David.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, panelists and attendees. It's a pleasure to be here. And I feel like I should say, yes, there is a relation, but hopefully I have some meaningful comments to add. This is an area of significant professional experience for me. I'm really excited to talk about a recent development. O2 Utah has been working with members of the legislature, and yesterday we announced we will be introducing framework and legislative policy to reduce emissions, with the goal of reducing emissions here along the Wasatch Front 50% by 2030. So a lot to dig into there. But before we do that, I think I would be amiss to not talk about some of the contextual concerns I have about how we make decisions on air quality in this state, because more important than our policy really is how we make those decisions. And specifically to the question of, do I expect us to see the sort of political leadership from this administration to make significant strides in reducing air quality? At this point in time, I'm not particularly optimistic. I want to flag why that is. Traditionally, the state of Utah, particularly our executive administration, so much of has taken a hands-off approach to improving air quality. We see a lot of improvement that comes from federal regulations around vehicles, federal regulations around industrial sources, federal regulations around appliances. So think of your furnaces and water heaters. And I think we've been too content to simply let the federal government drive the ship. Utah could do more. We should do more. In fact, oftentimes the administration will engage in damaging lawsuits. So for example, challenging California's efforts to pursue cleaner vehicles for everyone in the country. Or we see administrative efforts to evade responsibility. So for example, Utah asking for exemptions on ozone. I hope we won't go down that road again, because despite those warnings, I am optimistic. We're in a unique time where we do have the technology to meaningfully reduce pollution, and it makes a difference. Where we are today, it's important to note, the average Utahn will live 2 years less because of our air quality. That's where we are today. It is costing our economy roughly $2 billion a year. Investing in cleaning our activities makes economic sense as well. The best research anticipates that for every dollar we spend, we get $32 of benefits and economic growth. That's every dollar we spend in cleaning our air. Now for this administration, why do I expect that they'll continue on those trends? There are 3 things I want to flag, again, with the hope that this can be the discussion that helps to get us off of that trend. One is the governor's not here today, nor is the lieutenant governor. And no disrespect to anybody who's participating today, but if this is a top priority for the state, and it is that important, discussing this policy at the state's premier nonpartisan policy think tank is really a venue that he should be discussing this. And if he's not doing it here, where is he doing it? Second, elections are probably 80% of policy. They really do shape and drive how administrations move forward. And we know that in Utah, probably the key moment in the way that governors are elected is in the Republican convention. thanks to great research from the Utah Foundation, we know that Republican delegates have different priorities than Utahns in general and Republicans in general. Utahns in general and Republicans in general both identify air quality as a top priority. Republican delegates don't. So concern number 2 is that fact, and it's understandable if this isn't a priority for the governor, because the political process that we have created to select our governor also diminishes the importance of air quality. And finally, the way that campaigns are funded is critical in determining priorities. As I said, we know that the public as a whole benefits from air quality improvements. We know that our economy does, but there are some entities that do not. Those entities are good at participating in elections. And what that means is that the governor is going to have some hard conversations with key supporters about necessary actions to clean our air. So with that optimistic take, I'll turn the time back to you, Peter.
Well, David, that was not particularly optimistic. I will turn to Kim Shelley. This not optimistic take. What would be your response to that? Kind of speaking from within the administration.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I certainly appreciate David's remarks, and I would highlight that I am a cabinet level position, and DEQ is an independent agency that is in charge with protecting and enhancing air quality. And so, while I agree that the governor and lieutenant governor's schedules are incredibly demanding, I realize I'm a poor substitute, but at the same time, I'm a conduit for the governor. I do have the governor's ear and the lieutenant governor's ear, and we have discussed air quality, and the governor has made it a priority across the state, not just along the Wasatch Front in his One Utah roadmap, and throughout many different areas across the state. So I do take exception to the comments made, but I do see the governor's commitment, and I would like to discuss this further. I'm looking forward to further conversations with David as this panel continues.
Thank you, Kim. Kim Frost, can you tell us what are the things that you see as maybe reasons for optimism, or if not optimism, at least what are some of the low-hanging fruit that we should be looking to address with regard to air quality?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that the panel's spoken about is that we really have made a lot of progress. Our vehicles are getting cleaner, our fuel is getting cleaner. We've made a lot of headway on those on-road sources that Kim mentioned, and we're continuing to put technology and effort towards that. I see that as being an area that will continue to improve. I think one of the areas that we need to focus on next probably is our area sources, and so those are our businesses and our homes. And there have been some federal regulations, as David mentioned, but I think that there's a lot of energy and effort in going into that, and then a lot of optimism around the way that we're growing. We work really closely with the Wasatch Front Regional Council, who kind of models our growth in the state, and they have a lot of air quality consideration in their planning. They're going out with the Wasatch Vision. I just participated last night in the Wasatch Choice workshop in Box Elder County, and they're going out across the state, and there is a lot of effort put towards how we grow and making sure that we have small hubs that are accessible to people in different communities so that we're driving less. We have active transportation. UTA and UDOT are also investing a lot in our transportation for the future, and so I feel like those are areas where we'll see a lot of positive growth.
And David, I think you would agree on the importance of addressing the area sources. What if you were king for a day, what would be the first thing you would want to address on that?
Yeah, great question. Building standards. We have the technology today to build homes and offices that do not have emissions, that wouldn't contribute. But Utah's building standards are actually behind those of most states. I think that's really where the source has to be. And then an effort for existing structures, probably a point of sale to require efficiency improvements. In most homes and buildings, upgrading to a newer furnace, to a newer water heater will have significant impacts on our air quality. So that's where I would start with area sources.
And I want to ask the two Kims first, then I want to hear from Jill on this. But you know, the encouraging a shift to cleaner vehicles. Are there steps that we can take that will be significant and meaningful, particularly when we think about those older, heavy-duty trucks that are out there on the road that are disproportionately having a negative impact on our air quality? You know, what are the things that we can do that would be substantive and meaningful on that front? Kim Shelley, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. So I think encouraging is perhaps the key word here. You know, under the Clean Air Act, states other than California are prohibited from creating emission standards for vehicles, and new diesel engines are up to 90% cleaner than engines produced before 2007. So over the years, the state has provided incentives to add emissions control to older diesel equipment, especially school buses, and to provide incentives for replacements funded by the Volkswagen Emissions Mitigation Settlement. So there's also a robust federal program under the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, or DERA, to replace older and highly polluting diesel engines with newer engines that meet the latest federal vehicle emission standards. So definitely incentives are the way that are the tool that we have. And you know, while we have tens of millions of dollars that have been utilized for these replacements, there's perhaps tens of billions of dollars in the value of older vehicles that we need to approach, and that should be our next step, is not taking our foot off the gas, so to speak, with these incentives, and continuing to encourage folks to adopt the newer technology that is less polluting.
Kim Frost, do you have some additional thoughts on that front?
Yeah, I think Kim did a really good job addressing kind of heavy duty trucks and fleets. So maybe I'll shift a little bit to personal vehicles and talk a little bit about that. We have seen, you know, big infrastructure projects that are going in around EV charging stations throughout the state. We work with a group, Leaders for Clean Air, that helps businesses put in the infrastructure on their properties. So businesses are actually, you know, leading that charge. We know that individuals are 6 times more likely to have an electric vehicle if there's actually a charging station at their work. So we see a lot of movement in that direction.
Thank you, Kim. Jill, are there ways to leverage the inland port's role in the future of logistics here, transportation logistics, to encourage a shift to cleaner vehicles, to encourage a shift away from these older vehicles? Are you all looking at that?
Thank you, Peter. And yes, we are. And I make 2 points here. One, market driven. The market is moving towards more sustainability in the fleets because people are moving the market that way, right? Investors are insisting that the entire supply chain is more sustainable. So that is one point that I'll make. And if people want to get more into the weeds, please contact us and we can talk more through that at more in depth. And the second piece that I will say is I'll reiterate the infrastructure. The Port Authority is really about building out the necessary infrastructure. Kim talked a little bit about that, but range of anxiety is just as true on the heavy duty piece as it is for personal vehicles. And so really looking at where the infrastructure needs to be for heavy duty and along the corridors. Truck movement, and don't confuse it with cargo movement. Truck movement moves in a triangle from LA to Oakland to Salt Lake City, back to LA, Long Beach. And so in putting that infrastructure in place so those trucks can move sustainably is really what we're looking at.
And talk a little bit more about this. So obviously, you're probably aware that the inland port has been controversial in some circles.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
And so the perspective and from at least some of those who are concerned about it, is that this is going to be a magnet for bad air quality drivers. The counterpoint to that would be that that the inland port is a way of gathering that kind of activity in one place. Can you talk about that difference in viewpoint and really give us something substantive and real on the latter point, if that's where you all land on it?
Sure, thank you. I very much appreciate that question. I'll go back to sort of the myth and the misconception that the Port Authority is a single location and it's a place where instead it's a system. Logistics is about a system and cargo, right, does not care about an artificial boundary that was drawn up in a statute. And cargo moves according to need. And it doesn't care about a state boundary, a city boundary, a county boundary. And so we are looking at how cargo moves and how to do that more efficiently. And so if you think about the jurisdictional area that was drawn, yes, we are definitely looking at how to look at that more effectively and the efficiency within that area, but we are just as importantly looking at the statewide system and where cargo is flowing throughout the state. And if things don't need to come into Salt Lake City, even if they're coming into Salt Lake City right now, how can we disperse that cargo away from the Wasatch Front holistically, but Salt Lake City in particularly?
Interesting. So looking ahead here, the Utah Foundation released a report at the end of July looking at the fact that the economy is going green. It's one of the takeaways from that report is that it's happening kind of regardless of policy pressures. You know, we saw some leaps and bounds at the national level in terms of greenhouse gas reductions during the previous administration in the White House, which generally wasn't considered, you know, the champion of environmentalism. And so, you know, we see, and that's just one example, but we see a lot of ways in which the economy, the green economy is just driving itself now. It's got its own momentum. That poses a challenge for Utah, both in terms of the way that we make up for losses as a result, but also the challenge of taking advantage of innovation. And so I would like to put the question to the panel about, you know, are there ways that we can get ahead of that curve on the green economy and be leaders on the innovation front? Whoever wants to go first.
Peter, can I jump in on this one? And sure. I think it ties to our point on vehicles. I think we have a misunderstanding here in the state about markets and how they work in relation to air pollution. Without intervention, without government intervention, the tendency of markets when it comes to air pollution will be to allow pollution. It's typically in the best interest of an individual or a business to pollute. Economics 101 is that there are certain businesses that, you know, typically in a functioning economy, in a functioning market, a firm will both internalize its costs and its benefits. But with pollution, firms internalize the benefits, so the product they sell, they get those profits, but they externalize their costs, which is the pollution. And so we have a mismatch in our economy between what the proper amount of goods and services is when it comes to polluting activities. The thing that drives a market and innovation when it comes to clean tech is really a standard that says there is a reward if you can eliminate pollution. Our improvements in vehicles don't come because customers are showing up and saying to Toyota, boy, I really wish your Tundra had a smog rating of 7 rather than 5. Those improvements are coming because of federal standards. And I think vehicles illustrates my criticism perfectly of why the state will not make significant leaps on air quality. You know, Kim, you mentioned that the Clean Air Act prohibits Utah from telling auto manufacturers, your engines cannot pollute beyond a certain level. That is true. But the state can treat those vehicles differently in other ways. And I think the best way to illustrate that is how we treat vehicles when it comes to roads. You know, anytime we talk about vehicles from state policy purpose, we're really implicating two huge resources. One, our transportation system, and the other is air quality. When it comes to transportation, the state charges everybody for use of vehicles through gas taxes. And in fact, we're at a point where we're discussing road use charges. Imagine we're getting so precise in connecting to consumers their behavior in driving cars and the cost of funding our public infrastructure that we could potentially be charging people by the mile driven and even the weight of their vehicle. People know precisely what the cost is of their use of roads, their vehicle use on that resource. When it comes to air quality, there's nothing that tells me that. There is no difference between buying the cleanest car on the road and the dirtiest car. The state could easily change that. We could charge different registration fees for those two vehicles every single year. That's how we really create the big incentives to move away from dirty technology, and we're not limited by federal law on that front. That's what we need to see from the state to really make leaps on air quality.
Kim Shelley, what's your response?
Yeah, I agree with many of the points that David made. You know, there is definitely more that we can do as a state and as policymakers, and I am really encouraged by some of the concepts that David has put forward. I do want to point out, though, that you know, it's difficult to compare miles driven to pollution from a specific vehicle. You know, for the majority of the vehicles, excuse me, the majority of the emissions come from a cold start period, when the emission controls aren't yet effective and the computer is still adjusting the timing and fuel delivery, and the catalytic converter isn't hot enough to operate. So I think we need to look at this a little bit more holistic rather than just miles driven. But I agree with many of the points that David made.
Kim Frost, you may recall the Utah Foundation did a report on road usage charges earlier this year. Any thoughts on how that policy lever might be used to address air quality?
Yeah, as you know, we don't really get engaged in policy discussions, but I think that road usage is something that we all need to be looking at. You know, as we look at the gas tax and paying for our infrastructure, I think we still need to maintain that there are incentives for people that are driving electric vehicles, and I don't think that that's the answer. But as we approach the legislative session, we hope that our legislators and kind of policy groups will work with them to identify different ways to actually pay for our infrastructure, rather than a road use tax that would be on drivers of electric vehicles as well.
Yeah, we certainly saw in our look at alternative fuel vehicles a couple of years ago that there didn't seem to be a strong correlation between providing incentives and uptake of electric vehicles, passenger vehicles, unless they were at a really, really high level. And so, you know, the question of incentives there comes up as one that, you know, and partly too, if you're giving somebody an incentive to buy a Tesla, you're probably giving a wealthy person an incentive, which raises other concerns. Let's look at another big trend out there that we have reported on. We've released 2 reports in the past year about teleworking. And, you know, one of the things I like to think about with this is that if we come out of this strange time we're living through right now with, say, only 10% of our workforce now teleworking, how does that compare to, say, you know, adding transit miles or adding active transportation miles? It would seem to have a significant impact, but then there are also some land use impacts there. Are there any thoughts in the panel about the role of telework and where it might take us, how it might help us, what maybe the limitations might be there?
I'll jump on that one, and then maybe Kim Shelley wants to add some additional thoughts there. But I think we've really seen a good example from the state of teleworking. We've learned some really good lessons from them about where it works and identifying kind of your eligible work group. So who's actually eligible to telework, and then when those mandatory action days are forecasted by the Division of Air Quality, being in a position to really act and have those people work from home. We know that it does have a great impact on our air quality. We know that it's one of the solutions that individuals can take for improving our air quality. Those mandatory action days are really forecasted before we have a poor air quality day. So we want to take action before we get to a red air quality day. And we know that teleworking can be part of that solution. The other thing that I think we've learned from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget is that we can't expect to go back to the same normal as what we did before the pandemic. The companies that are doing that are having challenges kind of moving to this hybrid telework situation, but really know that teleworking for air quality is going to have to be something that's part of our new normal and that we're doing really year round.
Thank you, Kim. Go ahead, Kim Shelley.
Yeah, thank you. Just to build on what Kim said, and I completely agree with what she laid out for us, but I'm really proud of the state for taking a leadership role. This was a bill that was passed during the 2021 general session that required all state agencies to surge telework, and I think it's made a difference. And I do hope that private industry as well will take note and incorporate more telework days as well, as we look for. Really, all of us have to be part of the solution. We all have to contribute to this if we want to see any kind of meaningful impact. And this is just one tool that we have and that we've learned over the past 18 months to 2 years works very well for folks and without a hit to productivity. So I would encourage industries to take a look at the state model and incorporate that into their own business practices.
Okay. And I want to go back for a second. David, did you have something to add on the vehicle miles traveled? Okay, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience. We'll turn to those now. All right, we'll start with the tough one first for David. David, why is David diminishing and criticizing all of the hard work undertaken by local and state government and NGOs to get us to the point where we are, which is a much better place in the past? Does he realize how much progress has been made? And then there's a shot taken at you here. And then this comment, this is a depressing ploy to politicize an issue that needs less politics, not more.
Yeah, no, sure, that's fair. I don't want to diminish the fact that we've improved significantly. We have. And I think the important part of that is that it's very meaningful in terms of the lives of Utahns, and that it's important in terms of our economy. I hope people understand that I'm very clear on that. But I'm not content with where we are. And I don't think people should be. Look, I do feel very passionately about this because I'll go back to those stats. Where we are today, Utahns on average will lose 2 years of life. That is unacceptable. And I have kids. And yes, I do feel passionate about this. I think that one of the things that's frustrating about air quality is that from the get-go, we take a lot of options and things off the table. As I discussed with vehicles, we're too content to let the federal government drive the ship. We could control our destiny there much more if we were willing to do things like I discussed, like set different fees, registration fees for cleaner vehicles. This is where we would really make the progress. We have to get off of that if we really want to make a difference for those lives, if we want to make a difference for our economy. I mean, these will be the things that will derail us. These will be the things that will hold us back. So have we improved? Yes, for sure. But should we be content? No, not at all. And I'm unapologetic about that.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions here for Jill. Jill, as you know, there will be many trains transporting goods to the inland port. Freight switchers are very polluting, I believe tier 0, and over $1 million to replace. What are your plans for dealing with this very polluting issue, and I guess also expensive issue?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, I would add to that question that as we're looking at train and railroad transportation, that a train travels 480 miles on 1 gallon of fuel. And so, the railroad industry is 100% or close to 100% privately funded. When we're looking at the trucking industry, they are over 60% subsidized by the public sector. And so we have to weigh these things against each other when we're looking at transportation of our freight and the goods that we order every day, that we go to the store and pick up. One other stat that I will give you is that rail accounts for total, holistically speaking, rail accounts for 2% of greenhouse gas emissions, and trucks account for 24%. And so again, I understand the question, and we look at all of this, but when we holistically look at the air emissions, truck versus rail, we have to look at all of it combined.
So it sounds like it's both a matter of priorities and also a matter of how much leverage you have.
Yes. But one more thing I will tell you, it's not that we're discounting it. We are working with partners towards shifting engines and switcher engines over to both EV and hydrogen. So we are looking at all of it and looking at the switching of both train engines and heavy duty vehicles. Okay.
Thank you, Jill. Here's a question from our friends at Western Resource Advocates. During his campaign, Governor Cox said his administration would set a goal of reducing overall emissions by 25% during his 4-year term. Will he follow through on this air quality promise, or what is the administration doing specifically? Go ahead, Kim Shelley.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the question. And so yes, it is a priority of the governor and his administration, and it's laid out a framework within his One Utah roadmap. I'll just name a couple of the items that are currently being worked on. Converting the state fleet to zero or low emission vehicles that utilize Tier 3 gasoline. You know, we have a number of vehicles across the state to support the workforce that's about 25,000 employees. This will make a significant difference. We're continuing to invest in electric vehicle charging stations, and we're working to deliver on high-profile sustainability projects such as the Point, as well as laying the groundwork for the creation of a premier air quality and changing climate solutions laboratory at the Point as well. So with more data, we know better and we can do better, and that's the point of developing this laboratory to study the information and the unique geography that we have here in the state. So initially, the governor has focused on vehicle emissions, and with the release of the Roadmap 2.0 coming in the next few weeks, there'll be some other items that will be highlighted as well regarding his goals towards meeting the 25% reduction in emissions.
Thank you, Kim. Is somebody going to say something? Okay, thank you. This is a question from Ari Bruning from Envision Utah. He asks, Utahns are starting to experience some significant impacts from climate change in the form of wildfires, reduced snowpack, and flooding from monsoonal rainstorms. Many air quality strategies will also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but some do not, and vice versa. How should we be thinking about the intersection of these two issues? Kim Frost, if you could go first, and then David, maybe your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to have the conversation around climate change. I think it's something that, you know, we as an organization are looking at and how we approach it. But more than anything, we do feel like there's a lot of overlap between improving our air quality. So as we, you know, set out these strategies to improve our air quality, I think there is a lot of improvement that will be made broadly. We're looking at renewable energy, and we have partners that are working on that as well. So, Utah Clean Energy, looking at renewables and how those can be part of the solution as well.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, two thoughts on this, Peter. One, I thought actually in your introduction, you laid this out well. Climate change is really the driver behind the increase in wildfire smoke that we're seeing here in Utah. And wildfire smoke, from what I can see from the monitoring data, has really stalled out our progress. The reaction to that, I think, as you said, really should be, we need to work harder on those things we can control. We need to work harder here at home to make sure that we have clean air. And then in terms of what we do at home, thinking about that, I think, reduce emissions as much as we can, wherever we can. And largely we will get the same bang for the buck in terms of carbon reduction as we will for fine particulates and other criteria pollutants. Not always the case, but I think it's just keep focused on that.
So with that in mind, and there's a question here about area source emissions and low-hanging fruit strategies. If each one of you could just sort of pick one doable thing, say, I don't want to say within the next year, but within the next 5 years, one doable thing over which we do have control, what would it be? Kim, Shelley.
Boy, this is a tough question to boil it down to one doable thing.
Well, you could pick one of. We could stipulate that there may be others that are out there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But one of many priorities, one of many low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of. I will just start off. I guess the low-hanging fruit. Of course, there is the building code, and there is someone who mentioned a comment about that, and there are changes and updates that we can make to the building code to have a real difference in the emissions from buildings and area sources. So, as policymakers are meeting for the general session, I would hope that they would consider some of those changes and see the impacts that they could have. That's relatively easy, right, to make as you're building and constructing new homes and new buildings.
Kim Frost, I know you like to stay out of the fray, but you willing to jump in on this one?
Yeah, well, I'll take the UCAIR position on this one, and I'll just say that I think that we really need to make a lot of ground up when it comes to our summertime air quality. I think, like I mentioned, we have done a lot in the winter to educate the public about their kind of role in emissions and pollution. And I think rather than letting people kind of throw their hands up and say it's wildfires during the summer, we need to recognize that it's ozone, and reduction in pollution will help that. We really need to make some progress on educating the public about that and taking the same strategies that we do during the winter.
Thank you, Kim. Jill, any thoughts?
Yeah, staying out of the fray as well, right? Low-hanging fruit, quite frankly, for the Port Authority is our transloading facility. The transloading facility takes existing current cargo moving into our markets. 90% of it moves by truck today. If we put 10% of that, 10% of the current cargo moving into our market on rail, we will take 13,000 trucks off the road today. We do that because 3 intermodal international boxes can go into 2 domestic 53 trucks. 3-to-2 conversion, 13,000 trucks off the road. Low-hanging fruit.
Thank you, Jill. David.
I think I ought to stay out of the fray on this one. I'm just kidding. I'm happy to jump into the fray. I'm going to cheat a little bit and agree with Kim Shelley, and I talked about this before, building standards. 2 big sources of pollution are our area sources and our vehicles. We can get there with building standards. We need to upgrade them. And then the second would be on vehicles. The state just needs to treat vehicles when it comes to emissions the exact same way that it treats vehicles for funding our roads. So really just bring that congruence in, and we could make a big difference on those emissions.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. There are a bunch more really interesting questions from our audience, and I just have to apologize that not having time to get to them all. Thanks to Jill Flygare, Kim Frost, David Garbett, and Kim Shelley for their insights this morning. Thanks again to the Garbett Family Foundation for its generous sponsorship of this breakfast briefing. And thanks to all of you for being with us. We hope this has been informative, and have a great day.